The crisp autumn wind carried the scent of wood smoke and distant rain as the stagecoach rumbled down the rutted dirt road toward Centralia, Wyoming Territory. The year was 1875, and Daisy Zimmerman clutched her single valise with trembling fingers, her other hand dabbing uselessly at the tears streaming down her face. The driver had long since given up trying to make conversation with the distraught young woman, focusing instead on navigating the treacherous mountain pass that would deliver them to the small ranching town before nightfall. Daisy had left everything behind in Boston: her childhood home, her few friends, and the grave of her recently departed father. With mounting debts and no prospects, she had answered an advertisement in the matrimonial news, corresponding for 3 months with a rancher named Yates Garrison before agreeing to journey west as his bride. Now, as the coach descended into the valley and the small cluster of wooden buildings came into view, Daisy's tears flowed faster. What had she done? She was 20 years old, alone, and headed to marry a man she'd never met based on nothing but a handful of letters and a small, faded photograph that showed little more than the outline of a tall figure in a wide-brimmed hat. "Centralia comin' up, miss," the driver called over his shoulder. "Best get yourself ready. Your intended will be waitin' at the station." The thought only made her cry harder. The stagecoach rattled into town past the general store, the saloon, and the small white church before pulling to a stop in front of the station. The dust had barely settled when the door was yanked open from the outside. "Miss Zimmerman?" a deep voice asked. Daisy looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see a tall man silhouetted against the setting sun. She couldn't make out his features, but his broad shoulders filled the doorway. "Why, yes," she managed, her voice catching on a sob. Strong hands reached in to help her down from the coach. As her feet touched the ground, she got her first clear look at Yates Garrison. He was taller than she'd imagined, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His light brown hair was a shade darker than in his photograph, and a few days' worth of stubble lined his jaw. When he saw her tear-streaked face, his expression shifted from anticipation to concern. "Miss Zimmerman, are you all right?" He kept one hand steadying her elbow while the driver unloaded her trunk. She tried to speak, to offer some explanation or greeting, but instead, a fresh wave of tears overcame her. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs. Yates looked around at the small crowd that had gathered to watch the stagecoach arrival, then gently guided Daisy toward a bench outside the station. "Sit down for a moment," he said, his voice gentler than she'd expected from such a rugged-looking man. Daisy obeyed, clutching her handkerchief and trying desperately to compose herself. What must he think of her, arriving in such a state? I apologize, Mr. Garrison," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "This is not how I intended to make my introduction." Yates settled beside her on the bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "No need for apologies, Miss Zimmerman." He paused, studying her face with careful eyes. "And no need to pretend with me either." Her gaze snapped up to meet his. "Pretend." "That you're happy to be here," he said simply. "That this is what you wanted. I can see it isn't." Fresh tears threatened to spill. "I don't know what I was thinking," she admitted. "I've never been farther west than Philadelphia. I don't know the first thing about ranch life. And now I'm here to marry a stranger, and breathe," he instructed gently. "Just breathe." To her surprise, Daisy found herself obeying, taking in a deep lungful of the crisp mountain air. It tasted different from Boston cleaner somehow, with hints of pine and sage. "Let me make something clear," Yates continued. "The agreement we made through our correspondence stands only if you wish it to. I won't hold you to anything you've come to regret." Daisy blinked at him in surprise. "But the money for my passage is just money," he finished for her. "It doesn't buy a person." A small crowd had gathered at a discreet distance, pretending not to stare at the tearful male order bride and the town's most eligible bachelor. Yates noticed their audience and stood, offering Daisy his hand. "Let's continue this conversation somewhere more private. My housekeeper has prepared a room for you at my house in town. You can rest, collect yourself, and we can talk when you're ready." Daisy hesitated only briefly before accepting his hand. His palm was calloused but warm, and his grip was steady as he helped her to her feet. "What about?" She gestured vaguely in the direction of the waiting preacher, who stood awkwardly by the general store, Bible in hand. Yates shook his head. "There's no hurry. Despite what rumors might start flying tonight, you'll have your own room, your own space, and all the time you need to decide what you want." For the first time since the stagecoach had departed Boston, Daisy felt something loosen in her chest. She managed a watery smile. "Thank you, Mr. Garrison." "Yates," he corrected. "If we're going to be friends or anything else, you might as well use my given name." "Yates," she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. "And I'm Daisy." He nodded, a ghost of a smile touching his lips as he collected her trunk and led her toward a wagon parked nearby. The curious onlookers parted to let them pass, and Daisy couldn't help noticing the speculative glances exchanged among the townspeople. "Don't mind them," Yates murmured. "Small towns run on gossip like engines run on coal. They'll have something new to talk about by tomorrow." As they drove through Centralia's Main Street, Daisy tried to take in her surroundings through tear-swollen eyes. The town was small but neat, with a main street lined by wooden buildings with false fronts. A white steepled church stood at one end, while the other boasted a two-story hotel that seemed to be the grandest building in town. "That's the Mercantile," Yates pointed out as they passed a large store with a covered porch. "Run by the Miller family. Best place for supplies, though Mrs. Miller will talk your ear off if you let her." He continued pointing out landmarks: the schoolhouse, the doctor's office, the smithy as they traveled down the street and turned onto a side road. After a few minutes, they arrived at a modest but well-maintained two-story house set back from the road. "This is your town house?" Daisy asked, surprised. She had expected to be taken directly to a ranch. "My main ranch is about 5 miles outside town," Yates explained as he helped her down from the wagon. "But I keep this place for when business brings me to town or when the weather makes travel difficult." He carried her trunk up the steps to the front porch. "I thought you might prefer to stay here for a few days, to get acquainted with the town before seeing the ranch." Before Daisy could respond, the front door swung open to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Mrs. Potts, this is Miss Zimmerman," Yates introduced. "Daisy, this is Mrs. Potts, my housekeeper and the best cook in the territory." "Welcome, Miss Zimmerman," Mrs. Potts said warmly. "I've got your room all ready and dinner will be on the table shortly. You must be exhausted from your journey." Daisy managed a small smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Potts. That's very kind." Mrs. Potts ushered them inside, leading Daisy up a narrow staircase to a bright corner bedroom. The furniture was simple but sturdy: a 4-poster bed with a colorful quilt, a washstand with a porcelain basin, and a small writing desk by the window. "The bathroom is down the hall," Mrs. Potts explained. "I've drawn a bath for you already, and there are fresh towels waiting. Take your time freshening up. Dinner won't be for another hour." Left alone, Daisy sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the kindness these strangers had shown her. She had expected to be married by sundown, thrust immediately into the role of wife and homemaker. Instead, she had been given space, time, and the freedom to choose. The hot bath was a luxury after days of travel, and Daisy lingered in the scented water until it began to cool. She changed into her best dress, a simple blue cotton with white lace at the collar and cuffs, and pinned her dark hair up in a modest style. The face that looked back at her from the small mirror showed no trace of the sophisticated Boston lady she had once aspired to be, but the red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks had given way to something calmer, if still uncertain. Dinner was a quiet affair with Mrs. Potts doing most of the talking as she served a hearty meal of roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and fresh bread. Yates spoke little, but Daisy caught him watching her with those stormy gray eyes whenever he thought she wasn't looking. "Mrs. Potts makes the best apple pie in Wyoming Territory," Yates said as the housekeeper brought out dessert. "You're in for a treat." "It's my mother's recipe," Mrs. Potts said proudly. "Been in the family for generations." The pie was indeed delicious, the perfect balance of tart and sweet with a flaky crust that melted on the tongue. For the first time since leaving Boston, Daisy felt a flicker of something like contentment. After dinner, Yates invited her to join him in the small sitting room. Mrs. Potts discreetly retired to her own quarters at the back of the house, leaving them alone. "I imagine you have questions," Yates said, settling into an armchair across from her. Daisy nodded. "Several, but I hardly know where to begin. Perhaps I should start then." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'm 30 years old. I came to Wyoming 10 years ago with nothing but the clothes on my back and a dream of building something lasting. I now own the Double G Ranch, 4,000 acres of good grazing land and one of the most productive cattle operations in the county." "Your letters mentioned as much," Daisy said, though they were somewhat sparse on personal details. A faint smile touched his lips. "I've never been much for writing. Words don't come easily to me on paper. Yet you placed an advertisement for a bride." "I did." He met her gaze directly. "This territory needs women, needs families if it's ever going to be more than a wild frontier, and he hesitated. "I've built a good life here, but it's a lonely one." The honesty in his voice touched something in Daisy. "My circumstances were not as I presented them in my letters," she admitted. "My father died 6 months ago, leaving nothing but debts. Our house was sold to pay his creditors, and I was left with few options. I worked briefly as a shopgirl, but the wages were barely enough to rent a room. So you answered my advertisement." "Yes." She twisted her hands in her lap. "It seemed like providence at the time. A fresh start, away from the pitying glances of former friends." Yates nodded slowly. "We both had our reasons. But now that you're here, what do you want, Daisy?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked what she wanted in a very long time. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I came here prepared to be a wife, but now you're having doubts, wouldn't you?" "In my position," he considered this. "Yes, I suppose I would." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the mantel and the occasional pop from the fireplace. "I have a proposal," Yates finally said. "Stay here for 2 weeks. Get to know the town, the people, get to know me. At the end of that time, if you wish to return east, I'll provide the funds for your journey. And if I wish to stay," his eyes held her steadily, "then we can discuss what happens next. No pressure, no obligations, just 2 people figuring out if they might suit." It was far more generous than she had any right to expect. "Thank you," Daisy said softly. "That seems fair, good." He stood, indicating their conversation was at an end. "Get some rest. Tomorrow I'll show you around Centralia properly." As Daisy climbed the stairs to her room, she felt an odd mixture of relief and disappointment. Relief that she hadn't been forced into a marriage she wasn't ready for, and disappointment that the handsome rancher hadn't immediately swept her off her feet. She shook her head at her own foolishness. Real life wasn't like the romantic novels she'd sometimes indulged in back in Boston. Real life was complicated and messy and full of difficult choices. Yet as she drifted off to sleep in the unfamiliar bed, Daisy couldn't help wondering what the next 2 weeks might bring. Morning came with the scent of coffee and bacon drifting up the stairs. Daisy dressed in her second-best day dress, a practical brown wool with simple embroidery at the cuffs, and made her way downstairs to find Yates already at the breakfast table, reading a newspaper. He stood when she entered, folding the paper and setting it aside. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in weeks," she admitted. "The mountain air agrees with me, I think." Mrs. Potts bustled in with a plate piled high with eggs, bacon, and hot cakes. "Eat up, dear. You're far too thin. We need to put some meat on those bones if you're going to survive a Wyoming winter." Daisy couldn't help laughing. "Is it really so severe?" "The winters can be harsh," Yates confirmed. "But there's beauty in them too, the mountains covered in snow, the clear blue skies." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Yates outlined his plans for the day. "I thought we'd start at the Mercantile. You'll need some things more suitable for life here than what you've brought from Boston." Daisy bristled slightly. "My wardrobe is perfectly adequate." He raised an eyebrow, glancing pointedly at her impractical shoes. "For a Boston drawing room, perhaps. But Wyoming mud and snow require sturdier footwear, and those eastern fabrics won't stand up to the work of a ranch." "I hadn't realized I would be expected to perform manual labor," Daisy said stiffly. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Everyone works on a ranch, Daisy, even me. She flushed, embarrassed by her assumption. Of course, I didn't mean to imply no offense taken. He stood, offering her his arm. Shall we? The morning was spent at Miller's Mercantile, where Mrs. Miller did indeed talk Daisy's ear off while helping her select practical items: sturdy boots, warm woolen stockings, flannel petticoats, and several yards of durable cotton for everyday dresses. Mr. Garrison has an account with us, Mrs. Miller explained when Daisy reached for her small purse. He instructed us to add whatever you need to his bill. Daisy glanced at Yates, who was examining a display of tools across the store. I can't accept, consider it a welcome gift, Mrs. Miller said firmly. And between you and me, it's about time that man found himself a wife. Been running that ranch alone too long. We haven't decided, Daisy began, but Mrs. Miller waved her protest away. Of course, but a word of advice, dear, don't let that stern exterior fool you. Yates Garrison is the finest man in these parts. Helped my Harold rebuild our barn after the fire last spring, wouldn't take a penny for his trouble. Before Daisy could respond, the bell above the door jingled, and a young woman about Daisy's age entered the store. She was strikingly beautiful, with golden hair and a figure that even her modest dress couldn't disguise. Miss Bennet, Mrs. Miller greeted her. What can I do for you today? Just picking up some thread for Mother, the blonde replied, her eyes fixed on Yates. Yates Garrison, as I live and breathe. What brings you to town on a weekday? Yates turned, his expression carefully neutral. Miss Bennet, good to see you. Allow me to introduce Miss Zimmerman. Daisy, this is Lillian Bennet, the banker's daughter. Lillian's blue eyes swept over Daisy with barely concealed curiosity. Miss Zimmerman, we heard there was a stagecoach arrival yesterday. Are you visiting family in Centralia? Miss Zimmerman is my guest, Yates said before Daisy could answer. She's come from Boston, all the way from Boston. Lillian's perfect eyebrows arched. How adventurous of you, and how long will you be staying in our little town? That remains to be determined, Daisy replied, lifting her chin slightly. Something about Lillian Bennet's tone raised her hackles. Well, I do hope you'll attend the harvest dance this Saturday, Lillian said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. It's the social event of the season. Everyone will be there. Her gaze flicked to Yates. You are coming this year, aren't you, Yates? You missed the spring dance. I hadn't given it much thought, he admitted. You simply must come, Lillian insisted. And bring Miss Zimmerman, of course. It would be a perfect introduction to Centralia society. We'll consider it, Yates said noncommittally. After Lillian had made her purchase and left, Daisy turned to Yates with raised eyebrows. She seemed friendly. A hint of color touched his cheekbones. Lillian Bennet has been friendly to every unmarried man in the county with more than 10 acres to his name. Mrs. Miller snorted inelegantly. That girl has had her cap set for Yates since she turned 16. Her father would love nothing more than to combine the Bennet banking fortune with the Garrison ranch, Mrs. Miller, Yates warned, but the shopkeeper just shrugged. It's no secret, Yates. And Miss Zimmerman should know what she's up against if she's considering staying. Daisy felt her cheeks warm. I'm not up against anyone. Mr. Garrison and I have an arrangement, nothing more. Of course, dear, Mrs. Miller said, patting her hand. Now about these fabrics. By the time they left the mercantile, Daisy's head was spinning with names and relationships. Mrs. Miller had provided a complete history of nearly every family in Centralia, complete with scandals, feuds, and triumphs. I should apologize for Mrs. Miller, Yates said as they walked down the street. She means well, but discretion isn't her strong suit. No need to apologize. She was very informative. Daisy hesitated. This harvest dance she mentioned, we don't have to attend if you'd rather not. Actually, I think I'd like to. She smiled up at him. It seems like a good opportunity to meet people, and I do enjoy dancing, though I'm not sure my Boston waltzes will translate to a frontier celebration. You might be surprised. Centralia puts on airs of civilization when it wants to. He offered her his arm again. Hungry. The hotel dining room serves a decent lunch. The hotel dining room was nearly full when they arrived, and Daisy felt the weight of curious stares as Yates led her to a corner table. A waiter appeared immediately, showing a deference to Yates that suggested his position in the community. The special today is beef stew with fresh bread, the waiter informed them. Made with Mrs. Harper's recipe. We'll have two, Yates decided, and coffee, please. As they waited for their meal, Daisy observed the other diners. Most were well-dressed townspeople, but a few wore the practical clothing of ranchers and cowboys. At a large table near the center of the room, she spotted Lillian Bennett dining with an older couple who must be her parents. The man with Lillian is George Bennett, Yates explained, following her gaze. He owns the bank and has interests in several businesses in town. His wife, Margaret, is the daughter of one of the original settlers. You seem to know everyone, Daisy observed. It's a small community. Most of us have known each other for years. He took a sip of water. That can be both a blessing and a curse. How so? Everyone knows your business, good or bad. There's support when you need it, but privacy is a luxury. Is that why you live outside town? A smile touched his lips. Partly. I also prefer the open spaces. The ranch gives me room to breathe. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their food, hearty bowls of savory stew with crusty bread still warm from the oven. Daisy realized she was famished and applied herself to the meal with more enthusiasm than might be considered ladylike in Boston society. "This is delicious," she said between bites. "Wait until you taste Mrs. Potts' stew. This is good, but hers is legendary." As they were finishing their meal, a tall man in a dusty duster approached their table. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp and intelligent beneath his graying hair. "Garrison," he greeted Yates with a nod. "Sheriff Davis," Yates returned. "Daisy, this is Sheriff Thomas Davis. Sheriff, Miss Daisy Zimmerman from Boston." The sheriff tipped his hat to Daisy. "Madam, welcome to Centralia." "Thank you, Sheriff. Anything I should know about, Sheriff?" Yates asked. "Nothing urgent. Just wanted to let you know we caught those rustlers that hit the Peterson place last month. Found them trying to move the cattle across the territorial line. Good work. The Petersons recover their stock, most of it. Lost a few head." The sheriff's eyes flickered to Daisy. "Pardon the shop talk, Miss Zimmerman. Hazard of the job." "Not at all," Daisy assured him. "It sounds like important work. It has its moments." He turned back to Yates. "You planning on being in town for the dance Saturday?" "It seems likely," Yates replied with a glance at Daisy. "Good. Need to talk to you about that water rights issue with the Dawsons." After the sheriff departed, Yates explained, "The Dawson Ranch borders mine to the north. There's been some disagreement about access to the creek that runs between our properties." "Is it serious?" Daisy asked. "It could become so if not addressed. Water is as valuable as gold out here, especially in dry years." The rest of the afternoon passed quickly as Yates showed Daisy around Centralia. They visited the small schoolhouse where children of all ages were taught by a stern-looking woman named Miss Winters, the church where Sunday services were held rain or shine, and the doctor's office where Daisy met the kindly Dr. Elliott and his young assistant. "You're lucky to have a doctor in a town this size," Daisy remarked as they left. "We know it," Yates agreed. "When Doc Elliott first came through 10 years ago, the town council practically bribed him to stay, built him that house and office, guaranteed him patience." He smiled slightly. "Of course, with mining accidents, ranch injuries, and childbirth, he's never lacked for work." By the time they returned to Yates' house, Daisy's head was swimming with new faces and names. Mrs. Potts had dinner waiting, a savory pot roast with vegetables from her kitchen garden, and Daisy was grateful to sink into a chair and let the conversation flow around her. "The ladies at church are all aflutter about Miss Zimmerman's arrival," Mrs. Potts informed Yates as she served him a second helping of potatoes. "Mrs. Wilson is already planning to invite her to join the quilting circle. I hope you didn't confirm any details about our arrangement," Yates said, a slight edge to his voice. "I'm not one to gossip," Mrs. Potts sniffed. "I simply said Miss Zimmerman was your guest for the time being, and that was all anyone needed to know." "Thank you," Daisy said sincerely. "I appreciate your discretion." After dinner, Yates excused himself to attend to some paperwork, and Mrs. Potts shooed Daisy out of the kitchen when she offered to help with the dishes. "You've had a long day, dear. Go rest. There will be plenty of time for chores if you decide to stay." Alone in her room, Daisy found herself drawn to the window. The view looked out over the main street of Centralia, now quiet as evening settled over the town. Lanterns glowed in windows, and a few men still lingered outside the saloon down the street. It was so different from Boston, with its crowded streets and constant bustle. Here, the pace was slower, the spaces wider. She could see why Yates preferred his ranch outside town if it offered even more of the peace she felt settling over her now. A soft knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Yes. The door opened to reveal Yates, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought you something," he said, sounding almost shy. "A welcome gift." Curious, Daisy accepted the package and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a brand new copy of Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. "You mentioned in one of your letters that you enjoyed reading," Yates explained. "I asked Mrs. Miller to order this from back east months ago. It arrived last week." Daisy ran her fingers over the embossed cover, touched beyond words. "This is my favorite book," she said softly. "My copy was sold with the rest of our belongings when my father died. I remembered you mentioned it." He shifted uncomfortably, as if embarrassed by his own thoughtfulness. "Anyway, I thought you might like something familiar while you adjust to life here. Thank you." She looked up at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Behind the rugged exterior was a man of unexpected depths and kindness. "This means more than I can say." He nodded once, then retreated to the doorway. "Good night, Daisy. Good night, Yates." After he'd gone, Daisy changed into her nightgown and climbed into bed with the book. She read until her eyes grew heavy, the familiar story transporting her back to simpler times. As she drifted off to sleep, she realized that for the first time since arriving in Centralia, she had gone hours without thinking of Boston or the life she'd left behind. The next few days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings were spent with Mrs. Potts, learning the rhythms of the household and helping with chores. Afternoons, Yates would take her around town or on short rides in the surrounding countryside, gradually introducing her to the landscape and people of her potential new home. On Thursday, he suggested they ride out to see the ranch. "It's time you saw what you'd be getting into if you decide to stay," he said over breakfast. "Mrs. Potts has packed us a lunch. We can make a day of it." The idea both excited and terrified Daisy. "I should warn you that I'm not an accomplished horsewoman," she admitted. "We kept no horses in Boston." "I've arranged for a gentle mare," he assured her, "and we can take it slow." The mare, a dappled gray named Misty, proved to be as gentle as promised. After some initial nervousness, Daisy found herself enjoying the ride out of town. The day was clear and cool, with the aspens beginning to turn golden on the mountainsides. "It's beautiful," she said as they crested a rise that gave them a view of the valley below. "I had no idea Wyoming would be so magnificent." Yates looked pleased. "Wait until you see the ranch. It's in the next valley over, nestled against the foothills." When they finally rode through the gate, marked with a double G brand, Daisy understood why Yates had been so eager to show her his home. The Double G Ranch was an impressive operation, with a large two-story main house, several outbuildings, a substantial barn, and corrals filled with cattle and horses. "You built all this?" she asked, awed by the scale of it. "With help," he said modestly. "I started with just 100 acres and a dream. The rest came with time, hard work, and some luck." Several cowboys were working in the corrals, and they called out greetings as Yates led Daisy toward the main house. A tall, lean man with a weathered face detached himself from the group and strode over to meet them. "Didn't expect to see you out here today, boss," he said, tipping his hat to Daisy. "Madam, Daniel, this is Miss Daisy Zimmerman," Yates introduced. "Daisy, this is Daniel Carter, my foreman. He runs things when I'm not here, which has been more often than usual lately." "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Zimmerman," Daniel said. "Heard you came all the way from Boston. Quite a change of scenery, I'd imagine." "Indeed it is, Mr. Carter, but a welcome one I'm finding." Daniel's weathered face creased in a smile. "Glad to hear it. Boss has been needing something to smile about besides cattle prices." Yates cleared his throat. "How are the preparations for the winter coming along?" "On schedule. Got the last of the hay in yesterday. Should have enough to see us through even if the snow comes early." They chatted for a few more minutes about ranch business before Yates led Daisy toward the house. It was a handsome structure built of solid logs, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides and tall windows that caught the midday sun. "It's not as fine as what you're used to in Boston," Yates said as he opened the front door, "but it's comfortable." The interior was simply but tastefully furnished, with polished wooden floors covered by colorful woven rugs. A large stone fireplace dominated the main room, flanked by bookshelves filled with volumes that surprised Daisy with their variety. "You have quite a library," she observed, running her fingers along the spines. History, philosophy, novels both classic and contemporary, it was not the collection she would have expected from a frontier rancher. "Reading passes the long winter evenings," Yates said. "And I try to keep up with the world beyond these mountains." He showed her through the rest of the house, the dining room with its long table that could seat at least a dozen, the well-appointed kitchen with its modern cast iron stove, and a study lined with more books and filled with the tools of ranch management: ledgers, maps, and correspondence. Upstairs were several bedrooms, including the master's suite with its massive four-poster bed and adjoining dressing room. Daisy felt her cheeks warm as she stood in the doorway, suddenly very aware that this could be her bedroom too, if she chose to stay and marry Yates. "This room gets the morning sun," he said matter-of-factly, seemingly unaware of her discomfort. "And the view from the window looks out over the east pasture. In spring, it's covered with wildflowers." He showed her the other bedroom's guest rooms. He explained, though rarely used except when business associates visited or when ranch hands fell ill and needed closer attention than the bunkhouse could provide. "And this," he said, opening the door to a sunny corner room, "I had in mind for a nursery. Someday." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with implications and possibilities. Daisy looked at the empty room and could almost see it filled with a cradle, rocking chair, and toys. Children, a family, the things she had dreamed of even as she'd resigned herself to spinsterhood after her father's death. "It's a lovely room for children," she said softly. They ate their packed lunch on the porch, watching the activity in the corrals as the cowboys worked with the horses. Daisy found herself asking questions about ranch life, genuinely interested in understanding the world Yates had built. "It must be difficult, managing such a large operation," she observed. "It has its challenges," he admitted, "but it's rewarding in ways that are hard to explain. There's something about watching a calf you helped deliver grow into a fine steer, or seeing grass return to land you've carefully managed. You sound like you truly love it." "I do." He looked out over his domain with quiet pride. "This land gets in your blood, becomes part of you." They rode back to town in the late afternoon, the conversation flowing more easily between them than it had before. By the time they reached Yates' townhouse, Daisy realized she'd made a decision, though she wasn't quite ready to voice it yet. Saturday morning dawned clear and crisp, perfect weather for the harvest dance. Daisy spent the day preparing, washing her hair and pressing her best dress, a deep burgundy silk that had been one of her few indulgences before her father's death. It was perhaps more formal than the occasion called for, but she wanted to look her best. Mrs. Potts helped her arrange her hair in an elegant style, pinning the dark waves up with tortoiseshell combs. "You look lovely, dear," the housekeeper said, standing back to admire her work. "Mr. Garrison won't be able to take his eyes off you." "That's not my intention," Daisy protested weakly, though in truth, she had found herself increasingly drawn to Yates over the past days. His quiet strength, his unexpected kindness, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, all had combined to create an attraction she hadn't anticipated when she'd first stepped down from the stagecoach. When she descended the stairs that evening, Yates was waiting in the foyer, dressed in a dark suit that transformed him from rugged rancher to gentleman. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You look beautiful," he finally said, his voice low. "Thank you." She smoothed her skirts nervously. "Is it too much? I wasn't sure what was appropriate for a harvest dance in Wyoming." "It's perfect." He offered his arm. Shall we? The dance was held in the town hall, a large building normally used for community meetings and court sessions. Tonight, it had been transformed with autumn decorations, dried corn stalks, pumpkins, and colorful leaves adorned every corner, and lanterns cast a warm glow over the proceedings. A small band played on a raised platform at one end of the room, and couples were already spinning around the dance floor when Yates and Daisy arrived. Their entrance caused a stir, with conversations pausing and heads turning to watch them. "Ignore them," Yates murmured, guiding her toward a refreshment table. "They'll find something else to gossip about soon enough." He was proved wrong when, moments later, Lillian Bennett appeared at his elbow, resplendent in a pale blue gown that must have been ordered from Denver or even Chicago. "Yates, you came after all." Her smile was dazzling as she turned to Daisy. "And Miss Zimmerman, how lovely to see you again. That dress is charming, Boston fashion, I presume." Before Daisy could respond to the thinly veiled insult, Yates spoke. "Daisy outshines everyone here tonight." "Wouldn't you agree, Lillian?" Lillian's smile tightened. "Certainly. Now, Yates, you must save me a dance. Father is particularly eager to discuss that northern pasture with you." "Business can wait for another day," Yates said firmly. "Tonight is for celebration." As Lillian moved away, clearly displeased, Daisy couldn't help laughing softly. "She's certainly persistent." "Like a burr under a saddle blanket," Yates agreed. "Would you care to dance? I promise I won't step on your toes. Much." The band was playing a waltz, and Daisy found herself swept into Yates' surprisingly capable arms. He moved with an easy grace that belied his rugged appearance, guiding her around the floor with confidence. "You dance well," she observed, pleasantly surprised. "My mother insisted on lessons, even out here on the frontier. Said no son of hers would grow up to be a complete savage. She sounds like a remarkable woman." A shadow crossed his face. "She was. Both my parents were. They died in a flash flood 7 years ago. Their wagon was swept away trying to cross a river after a sudden storm." "I'm so sorry," Daisy said softly. "I know how it feels to lose family. Your father's passing was recent, 6 months ago, a stroke. It was mercifully quick, the doctor said, but still." She swallowed hard. "We'd already lost my mother when I was 12. After father died, I was truly alone." His hand tightened slightly on her waist, a gesture of understanding rather than pity. They danced in companionable silence for a time, each lost in memories. As the evening progressed, Daisy found herself introduced to nearly everyone in Centralia. The town doctor and his wife, the schoolteacher, the smithy and his family, the pastor and his plump, cheerful spouse all greeted her with varying degrees of curiosity and warmth. "You're quite the center of attention," Yates observed as they took a break from dancing, watching as yet another group of townspeople glanced their way and whispered among themselves. "It's not me they're interested in," Daisy replied. "It's you, or rather us, Mrs. Miller explained that you've rebuffed every eligible woman in the county for years. Your sudden appearance with a mail-order bride is the most exciting thing to happen in Centralia since, well, I'm not sure what. Since the Wilkins cow got stuck in the church belfry last Easter," Sheriff Davis supplied, appearing at their side with a cup of punch in hand. "That was quite the spectacle," Daisy laughed. "How on earth did a cow get into a belfry?" "Teenage boys with too much time on their hands," the sheriff explained. "But that's a story for another time. Miss Zimmerman, would you do an old man the honor of a dance? With your permission, Garrison." Yates nodded his assent, and Daisy allowed the sheriff to lead her onto the dance floor. He was a surprisingly spry dancer for his age, and as they moved through the steps of a lively reel, he took the opportunity to offer some insights. "Garrison's a good man," he said without preamble. "Best rancher in these parts and fair in his dealings. Community respects him." "I've observed as much," Daisy replied carefully. "He's been alone too long. Puts on a good face, but anyone who knows him can see he needs someone. A partner." The sheriff's weathered face creased in a smile. "Think you might be interested in the position, Miss Zimmerman?" Daisy felt her cheeks warm. "Sheriff Davis, I hardly think, just calling it as I see it. And what I see is a man who hasn't taken his eyes off you all evening, even when he was supposed to be listening to George Bennett drone on about water rights." The dance ended before Daisy could formulate a response, and the sheriff returned her to Yates' side with a knowing wink. "What was that about?" Yates asked, watching the sheriff walk away. "Just getting to know the local law enforcement," Daisy said lightly. As the evening wore on, even Yates couldn't escape his social obligations entirely. When George Bennett cornered him for a discussion about business matters, Daisy found herself momentarily alone by the refreshment table. "So you're the mail-order bride," a voice said behind her. Daisy turned to find herself face-to-face with Lillian Bennett, whose smile didn't reach her cold blue eyes. "I prefer Miss Zimmerman," Daisy replied evenly. "Of course you do." Lillian sipped her punch delicately. "You know, everyone's wondering what special quality you possess that convinced Yates Garrison to send for a bride from Boston when there are plenty of suitable women right here in Wyoming. Perhaps you should ask Mr. Garrison." "Oh, I intend to." Lillian's gaze swept over Daisy's dress with barely concealed disdain. "Though I can't imagine what he sees in you. You're hardly the type to thrive in the wilds of Wyoming. The first winter will send you scurrying back east, I'd wager." Before Daisy could respond, a warm hand settled on the small of her back. "Everything all right here?" Yates asked, his voice pleasant but with an underlying steel. "Perfectly," Lillian said sweetly. "Miss Zimmerman and I were just getting better acquainted. How nice." Yates turned to Daisy. "The band is playing a waltz. Would you care to dance?" Grateful for the rescue, Daisy allowed him to lead her away from Lillian's venomous presence and back onto the dance floor. "Don't let her bother you," Yates said as they began to dance. Lillian Bennett has always believed that wealth entitles her to whatever or whomever she wants. "Does it bother you?" Daisy asked. "Her interest, I mean." "It's not interest in me," he said bluntly. "It's interest in the Double G. Her father has been trying to expand his holdings for years. Marriage would be a convenient way to acquire 4,000 acres of prime ranch land. And you've never been tempted." His eyes met hers steadily. "Some things are not for sale." The simple statement, delivered with quiet conviction, stirred something in Daisy's heart. This man, with his integrity and quiet strength, was becoming increasingly difficult to resist. By the time they left the dance, the moon was high overhead, casting silver light on the quiet streets of Centralia. Yates offered Daisy his arm for the short walk back to his house, and they strolled in companionable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. At the front door, Yates paused, turning to face her. "I hope you enjoyed the evening." "I did," she said honestly. "Thank you for introducing me to everyone. They all seem to like you." His voice was soft in the moonlight. "Even Sheriff Davis, who doesn't impress easily." Daisy smiled, remembering the sheriff's not-so-subtle endorsement. "He's a character." "That he is." Yates hesitated, then added, "Tomorrow's Sunday. Church service is at 10 if you'd like to attend. No pressure, but it would be another opportunity to meet people." "I'd like that." They stood there for a moment longer, the air between them charged with unspoken possibilities. Daisy found herself studying his face in the moonlight, the strong jaw, the hint of stubble that had reappeared since his morning shave, the eyes that seemed to see right through her pretenses. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he reached out and gently tucked a stray curl behind her ear, his fingers lingering briefly against her cheek. "Good night, Daisy." "Good night, Yates." Inside, she climbed the stairs to her room, her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm. What was happening to her? She had come to Wyoming prepared to make a marriage of convenience, a practical arrangement born of necessity. She had not expected to feel this fluttering in her chest, this warmth that spread through her whenever Yates was near. In the privacy of her room, Daisy removed her combs and let her hair tumble down around her shoulders. As she changed into her nightgown, she caught sight of her reflection in the mirror. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright with an emotion she was only beginning to recognize. She was falling in love with Yates Garrison. The realization should have frightened her, but instead, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. As natural as the way the sun rose over the eastern mountains each morning, as inevitable as the changing seasons. Sunday dawned clear and bright. Daisy dressed carefully for church in a modest blue dress that complemented her dark hair and eyes. Mrs. Potts had already left for an early choir practice, So Daisy found herself alone with Yates at the breakfast table. "Sleep well?" he asked, looking up from his coffee. "Very," she replied, though in truth her thoughts had kept her awake far into the night. "You? Well enough." He studied her for a moment. "That color suits you." The simple compliment pleased her more than it should have. "Thank you." They walked to the church together, joining the stream of townspeople making their way toward the white steepled building at the end of the main street. Daisy noticed the curious glances directed their way, but they seemed less intrusive than before, as if her presence at Yates' side was becoming accepted, even expected. The church was nearly full when they arrived, but Yates led her to a pew near the back that seemed to be reserved for him. No sooner had they settled than Lillian Bennet and her parents entered, pausing in the aisle beside them. "Garrison," George Bennet said with a nod. "Miss Zimmerman, lovely to see you in church this morning." "Mr. Bennet," Yates replied politely. "Mrs. Bennet, Miss Bennet." "There's room in our pew if you'd care to join us," Mrs. Bennet offered, though her tone suggested the invitation was mere formality. "Thank you, but we're comfortable here," Yates declined. Lillian's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing as her parents led her to their customary place near the front of the church. The service was simple but heartfelt, with Reverend Thomas delivering a sermon on community and mutual support that seemed particularly relevant to Daisy's situation. The hymns were familiar from her Boston church, and she found herself joining in with more enthusiasm than she had felt for such things in a long time. After the service, there was a social hour in the churchyard, with the women of the congregation providing coffee and cake. Daisy found herself surrounded by curious but friendly townswomen, all eager to make the acquaintance of Yates Garrison's mysterious guest from Boston. "You must join our quilting circle," insisted Mrs. Wilson, a motherly woman with kind eyes. "We meet every Wednesday afternoon. Even if you've never quilted before, we'd be happy to teach you." "That's very kind," Daisy said. "I've done some needlework, though never quilting specifically." "Perfect. We need new blood. Some of these ladies have been telling the same stories for 20 years. Across the churchyard, Daisy could see Yates deep in conversation with several ranchers, including Daniel Carter, his foreman. Occasionally, his eyes would seek her out, as if checking that she was all right among the townswomen. "He's watching you like a hawk, Mrs. Wilson observed, following Daisy's gaze. "Never seen Garrison so attentive to anyone." Daisy felt her cheeks warm. "We're still getting to know each other." Mrs. Wilson's expression was knowing. "Well, if you need any advice about ranch life or ranchers, my door is always open. My Albert and I have been married 30 years, running our spread just south of the Double G." "Thank you. I may take you up on that." As they walked home after the social, Yates seemed thoughtful. "What did Mrs. Wilson want?" he asked eventually. "She invited me to join the quilting circle," Daisy replied, "and offered advice about ranch life." "Ah," he nodded. "Agnes Wilson is good people, straight-talking but kind-hearted. Her husband Albert is the same way, good neighbors to have." "You have a lot of friends here," Daisy observed. "Not friends exactly, neighbors, allies," he shrugged. "In a place like this, you depend on each other. A bad winter, a fire, rustlers, you need to know who will stand with you when trouble comes. And who will stand with you, most of them." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Except maybe George Bennet, who'd rather see the Double G become part of his holdings." They had reached the house, and Yates paused at the front door. "Daisy, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat at his serious tone. "Yes, I'm riding out to the ranch early tomorrow. There's work that needs my attention, and I've been away too long." He hesitated. "I'll be gone most of the week." "Oh," she tried to hide her disappointment. "Of course, you have responsibilities. You're welcome to stay here in town, Mrs. Potts will look after you, and you can get to know people better." "Thank you, that's probably best." He studied her face for a long moment. "When I return on Friday, your 2 weeks will be up. You'll need to have made a decision." The reminder of their arrangement hung heavily between them. 2 weeks to decide whether to stay and marry Yates or return east to an uncertain future. "I know," she said softly. "For what it's worth," he added, his voice low, "I hope you choose to stay." The simple statement, delivered without elaboration, warmed Daisy to her core. "Thank you for saying so." The next morning, Yates was gone before dawn, leaving only a brief note wishing Daisy a good week and promising to return by Friday evening. The house felt oddly empty without his presence, though Mrs. Potts did her best to keep Daisy occupied with household tasks and town errands. On Wednesday, true to her word, Daisy attended the quilting circle at Mrs. Wilson's home. The gathering of women ranging from young mothers to white-haired grandmothers welcomed her warmly, only occasionally peppering her with questions about Boston, her journey west, and her intentions regarding that stubborn Garrison boy, as Mrs. Wilson affectionately called him. "Don't let them intimidate you," whispered Sarah Elliott, the doctor's wife, as she showed Daisy how to piece together a simple quilt block. "They're just curious. It's not every day a mail-order bride arrives in Centralia." "Is it that obvious?" Daisy asked, embarrassed. Sarah smiled kindly. "Only because Garrison arranged for you to come. He's not the type to send for a cousin or a governess, and you're clearly too refined to be a housekeeper." "I'm not sure refined is an advantage out here," Daisy admitted, pricking her finger for the third time. "Don't sell yourself short," Sarah advised. "This territory needs women of education and culture as much as it needs strong backs. We're building a society, not just ranches and towns." The conversation gave Daisy much to think about as she walked back to Yates' house that afternoon. Perhaps there was a place for her in Wyoming after all, not just as Yates Garrison's wife, but as a contributing member of this growing community. On Thursday evening, as Daisy was helping Mrs. Potts prepare dinner, an unexpected visitor arrived. Sheriff Davis appeared at the kitchen door, his expression grim. "Evening, ladies," he said, removing his hat. "Hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Sheriff," Mrs. Potts replied. "Is something wrong? Nothing urgent. Just wanted to let Miss Zimmerman know there's been a delay." "Garrison sent word he won't be back until Saturday. There was trouble at the ranch, nothing serious, just a fence line dispute with the Dawsons that needed sorting out." Daisy felt a pang of disappointment, but kept her expression neutral. "Thank you for letting me know, Sheriff." "He also asked me to give you this." Davis handed her a sealed envelope. "Said it was important." After the sheriff departed, Daisy excused herself to read Yates' letter in privacy. His handwriting was strong and clear, much like the man himself. "Daisy," the letter began without preamble, "I regret the delay in my return. The situation here requires my attention for longer than anticipated. I know our agreed 2 weeks ends tomorrow, but I hope you'll grant me until Saturday to discuss your decision. Whatever you choose, I want you to know these past days have been the brightest I've known in a long time. Yours, Yates." She read the letter twice, her heart warming at his words. It was not a declaration of love, but it was perhaps as close as a man like Yates Garrison would come to expressing his feelings in writing. Saturday morning dawned with a surprising development. Lillian Bennett appeared at the door just after breakfast, dressed for riding and wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Zimmerman," she greeted Daisy coolly. "I hope I'm not interrupting your morning." "Not at all," Daisy replied, though in truth she had been busy helping Mrs. Potts with the laundry. "What brings you here, Miss Bennett?" "I thought you might like to ride out to the Double G with me today," Lillian said. "Father has business with Mr. Garrison, and I offered to deliver some documents to him. I assumed you'd be eager to see the ranch again before making your decision." The invitation surprised Daisy, given Lillian's obvious dislike of her, but the opportunity to see Yates sooner rather than later was tempting. "That's very thoughtful," she said carefully. "But I'm not sure." "Oh, it's no trouble at all," Lillian interrupted. "I've already arranged for 2 horses, unless you'd prefer to wait here in town while Yates handles his business with Father." There was something in Lillian's tone that raised Daisy's suspicions, but she couldn't quite put her finger on what it might be. "Let me change into something more suitable for riding," she decided. "I'll only be a moment." 20 minutes later, the 2 women were riding out of town, Daisy on the same gentle mare she'd ridden with Yates earlier in the week. Lillian set a brisk pace, clearly an accomplished horsewoman, and conversation was minimal as they followed the now familiar trail toward the Double G Ranch. It was only when they were well away from town that Lillian slowed her horse to ride alongside Daisy. "Has Yates told you much about his past?" she asked, her tone deceptively casual. Some, Daisy replied cautiously. I know he came to Wyoming 10 years ago and built the ranch from almost nothing. Did he tell you why he came west? What he was running from? Daisy frowned. He wasn't running from anything. He came to build a future. Lillian laughed, the sound as brittle as ice. Is that what he told you? How romantic. The truth is considerably less heroic. I'm not interested in gossip, Miss Bennett. It's not gossip, it's history. Yates Garrison left Missouri one step ahead of the law. There was a fight, a man died. Some say it was self-defense, others call it murder. Daisy's hands tightened on the reins, causing her mare to toss its head nervously. I don't believe you. Believe what you like, Lillian shrugged. But you might want to ask yourself why a man like Garrison, handsome, successful, respected, had to send all the way to Boston for a bride instead of courting someone local. Perhaps because the local women come with too many strings attached, Daisy retorted. Thinking of George Bennett's obvious designs on the double G, Lillian's eyes narrowed. You think you're so clever, don't you? The sophisticated Boston lady swooping in to capture Wyoming's most eligible bachelor. But you don't belong here, Miss Zimmerman. You never will. Before Daisy could respond, they crested the final rise that overlooked the double G ranch. The sight that greeted them was unexpected. Several wagons were parked in front of the main house, and a group of men appeared to be in heated discussion near the corrals. Looks like Father's meeting has already started, Lillian observed. How inconvenient. They rode down to the ranch at a more sedate pace. As they approached, Daisy recognized Yates among the group of men, along with George Bennett and Sheriff Davis. Their conversation ceased abruptly as the women arrived. Yates strode forward to help Daisy dismount, his expression a mixture of surprise and concern. Daisy, what are you doing here? Miss Bennett kindly offered to escort me, she explained, sensing immediately that something was wrong. She said she had documents from her father. Yates' gaze shifted to Lillian, who was now being helped down by her father. Is that so? George Bennett approached, his manner formal. Garrison, we were just discussing the terms. Perhaps we should continue inside. There are no terms to discuss, Bennett, Yates said firmly. As I've told you repeatedly, the double G is not for sale. Daisy looked between the men in confusion. Sale? You're selling the ranch? No, Yates said emphatically. I am not. Bennett has made an offer, which I've declined, repeatedly. Be reasonable, Garrison, Bennett urged. With the drought conditions predicted for next year and the new railroad line bypassing Centralia in favor of Riverton, you're looking at tough times ahead. My offer is more than fair. The answer is still no. Yates turned to Sheriff Davis. Sheriff, I believe our business is concluded. If you wouldn't mind escorting Mr. Bennett and his daughter back to town. Now see here, Garrison, Bennett began, but the sheriff cut him off with a raised hand. You heard the man, George. Time to head back. As the standoff continued, Daisy felt increasingly out of place. She had clearly walked into the middle of something complicated, and Lillian's strange behavior now made more sense. The invitation to ride out to the ranch had never been about kindness. It had been a ploy to get her there during Bennett's attempt to pressure Yates into selling. I should return to town as well, she said quietly to Yates. I didn't mean to intrude on your business matters. Stay, he said, his voice softening. Please, there's nothing more to discuss with Bennett, and you and I have matters to settle. After several more minutes of tense conversation, Sheriff Davis managed to convince George Bennett and a fuming Lillian to return to town. As they rode away, Yates let out a long breath, the tension visibly draining from his shoulders. I'm sorry you had to witness that, he said, leading Daisy toward the house. Bennett has been trying to buy the double G for years. He's getting more desperate as his railroad investments turn sour. Lillian told me some things on the ride here, Daisy said carefully, about your past. Yates paused, his expression guarded. Did she now? And what tales did Miss Bennett spin? She said you left Missouri because of a fight, that a man died. He was silent for a long moment, then sighed. She wasn't entirely wrong, though her version was likely more dramatic than the truth. Will you tell me what happened? Daisy asked quietly. Yates led her to the porch, gesturing for her to sit in one of the rocking chairs while he leaned against the railing, facing her. I was 20 years old, he began, working as a blacksmith's apprentice in a small town outside Kansas City. There was a man, Julius Tanner, who owned half the businesses in town, including the saloon. He had a reputation for cruelty, especially to women. Yates paused, his eyes distant with memory. One night, I came upon him beating a young woman, a saloon girl named Mary, who had refused his advances. When I intervened, he drew a knife. We struggled, he fell, and the knife. He made a gesture with his hand. It was ruled self-defense by the local magistrate, but Tanner had powerful friends. My apprenticeship was suddenly terminated, no one would hire me, and there were threats against my family. So you came west? Yes, my parents gave me what little savings they had and told me to make a fresh start where no one knew me. His eyes met hers directly. I've never hidden this story, Daisy. Anyone who cared to investigate my past could discover it, as George Bennett obviously did. But neither do I advertise it. It's not something I'm proud of, even if I do the same thing again to protect an innocent woman. Daisy considered his words carefully. The man Lillian had described a fugitive from justice. A potential murderer bore little resemblance to the Yates Garrison she had come to know. The real story, while still tragic, spoke of a young man with a strong moral compass who had intervened to protect someone vulnerable. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. "You deserved the truth." He straightened, offering her his hand. "Are you hungry? Mrs. Potts sent some provisions with Daniel when he returned from town yesterday. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage sandwiches." The domestic scene that followed Yates assembling sandwiches in his ranch kitchen, while Daisy brewed coffee, felt surprisingly natural, as if they had been doing this together for years, instead of days. They ate at the kitchen table, the conversation flowing easily between them as Yates explained the dispute with the Dawsons that had delayed his return. "It's settled now," he concluded. "We agreed on a new line that gives them more water access in exchange for grazing rights on the North Ridge." "That sounds fair," Daisy observed. "Compromise benefits everyone. Usually." He studied her face for a moment. "Daisy, our 2 weeks are up. Have you made a decision?" The directness of the question took her by surprise, though she should have expected it. Yates Garrison was not a man who shied away from difficult conversations. "I have," she said, her heart pounding. "I would like to stay if your offer still stands." The relief that washed over his features was almost comical. "It stands," he assured her quickly. "Though I should clarify the terms now that we know each other better." "Terms? When I placed that advertisement, I was looking for a practical arrangement, a partnership I didn't expect." He trailed off, seemingly at a loss for words. "Didn't expect what?" Daisy prompted gently. Yates stood abruptly, pacing the length of the kitchen before turning to face her. "I didn't expect to feel this way. To find myself looking forward to your company, thinking about you when we're apart, wondering what you'll think of something I've read or seen." The words, delivered with such earnest intensity, made Daisy's heart soar. "And how exactly do you feel?" she asked, needing to hear him say it. He took a deep breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Daisy Zimmerman. And if you agree to stay and be my wife, I want it to be a real marriage in every sense, not just a practical arrangement." Daisy rose from her chair, closing the distance between them. "I feel the same way," she admitted. "I came here expecting a business transaction, but I found so much more." "I found you." For a moment, they simply stood there, gazing at each other as if seeing clearly for the first time. Then Yates reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "May I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. In answer, Daisy lifted her face to his. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but quickly deepened as years of loneliness and weeks of growing attraction converged in a moment of perfect understanding. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Is that a yes, then?" "You'll marry me?" "Yes," Daisy laughed, joy bubbling up inside her. "Though I hope you'll give me a little more time to prepare than your original plan of meeting me at the stagecoach and heading straight to the preacher." He grinned, looking younger and more carefree than she had ever seen him. "Take all the time you need. Within reason," he added with a wink. "I've waited this long for the right woman. I can wait a little longer to make her my wife." They were married 3 weeks later in the white steepled church of Centralia, with seemingly the entire town in attendance. Daisy wore a new dress of ivory silk, ordered specially from Denver by Mrs. Potts, who insisted that a bride should have something fine for her wedding day. Yates, handsome in a new black suit, could barely take his eyes off her throughout the ceremony. Mrs. Wilson and the quilting circle presented them with a wedding quilt, lovingly stitched with a pattern called double wedding ring. Sheriff Davis gave them a fine clock for the mantelpiece. Even Dr. Elliot and his wife contributed a gift, a beautiful leather-bound set of Shakespeare's works to add to Yates' growing library. Conspicuously absent were the Bennets. George Bennett had departed for Denver on business the week before, taking Lillian with him. Rumor had it that he was arranging a marriage for his daughter with the son of a wealthy railroad investor, a strategic alliance to shore up his failing investments. After the ceremony and a reception at the hotel dining room, Yates drove Daisy home to the Double G Ranch, her home now, too. As the wagon crested the final rise, giving them a view of the ranch buildings below, Daisy felt a sense of rightness settle over her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrison," Yates said, squeezing her hand. "It's perfect," she replied, and meant it. The years that followed proved Daisy right in her assessment. Life at the Double G was not always easy. There were droughts and harsh winters, disputes with neighbors and challenges with the cattle, but through it all, she and Yates faced each trial together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. Daisy found her place in the community as well. She joined Mrs. Wilson's quilting circle as a regular member, eventually teaching the younger women the fine needlework skills she had learned in Boston. When Centralia finally built a proper library, Daisy was appointed its first librarian, spending 3 afternoons a week sharing her love of books with the town's children and adults alike. Yates continued to expand the ranch, eventually adding sheep to their operation at Daisy's suggestion. The wool business proved profitable, especially when Daisy organized a cooperative of ranch wives to process and sell the wool directly to Eastern manufacturers, cutting out the middlemen who had been taking most of the profits. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Daisy gave birth to a son they named James, after Yates' father. 2 years later came a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Daisy's mother. The nursery that Yates had shown her on her first visit to the ranch was filled with laughter and toys, just as they had both imagined. On the 5th anniversary of Daisy's arrival in Centralia, Yates surprised her with a special gift, a new piano for the ranch house parlor, hauled all the way from Denver by wagon. "I remember you mentioning that you played back in Boston," he explained as she ran her fingers reverently over the polished keys. "I thought it was time our children had some music in their lives." "It's magnificent," Daisy breathed, sitting down to play a simple melody. "But how did you manage to keep it a secret, something this size?" "I have my ways," Yates said mysteriously, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Sheriff Davis helped, and Mrs. Potts is remarkably good at keeping secrets when properly motivated." Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Daisy found Yates on the porch, watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson. "Penny for your thoughts," she said, settling beside him on the swing he had built the previous summer. "I was just thinking about the day you arrived," he admitted. "How you stepped down from that stagecoach in tears, looking like you'd made the biggest mistake of your life." Daisy laughed softly, leaning against his shoulder. "I was terrified. Convinced I'd traded one desperate situation for another. And now," he turned to look at her, those storm-gray eyes still able to make her heart skip a beat after all these years. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made." She reached up to touch his face, tracing the lines that 5 years of Wyoming's sun and wind had added around his eyes. "When you told me I didn't have to pretend with you, that I could be honest about my fears, you gave me something no one else ever had, the freedom to choose my own path. And I'm grateful every day that you chose this one, chose me." He kissed her then, a kiss as full of promise as their first had been 5 years earlier. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the valley that had become Daisy's home. Inside the ranch house, their children slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they were loved. And on the porch, Daisy and Yates Garrison held each other close, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, even before they knew to look for it. The mail-order bride who had arrived in tears had found not just a husband, but a partner, a lover, and a friend. And the cowboy who had told her she didn't need to pretend had found the courage to be honest about his own heart, discovering in the process that the greatest adventure of all was loving and being loved in return. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Daisy made a silent wish of gratitude for the twist of fate that had brought her west, to this land, this life, and this man who had helped her find the strength she'd always possessed but never recognized until she'd found herself in his arms.